information about investing, you may order the NPR Video Library of Personal Finance by calling 1-800-535-5864. This program is available in either the VHS or DVD formats.
We are PBS. Funding for local broadcast of Nightly Business Report has been provided by viewers like you and by the following.
Union Bank of California, providing personal and business banking services, trust, and investment management to the Pacific Northwest since 1882.
She was a literary phenomenon.
Willa Cather.
Next time on American Masters, experience the life and works of writer Willa Cather.
My Antonia. O pioneers, death comes for the Archbishop.
It's Willa Cather. She wanted to be as big as the big guys.
Good Housekeeping magazine named her one of the 12 greatest women in America.
Look for Willa Cather, The Road Is All, on American Masters.
Join us tonight at 8 here on OPB.
Not so fond of your Ford? Own an abundance of Audis, or maybe you're just tired of your truck. You can support OPB's radio and TV programming with a donation of your used vehicle. Convert that surplus Subaru or rundown RV into a tax-deductible donation to OPB. For more information, call 503-244-9900 or visit us on the web at opb.org. And thanks for your support.
Business partners Northwest Senior News and Freightliner Group have made contributions to the Program Fund for Excellence. Additional funding has been provided by you, the contributing members of OPB.
This week on Oregon Art Beat, meet Doc Denny. He's performed with Roy Rogers and the Sons of the Pioneers. At 84, Doc still performs every week in Klamath Falls. Gregory Grennan paints his unusual portraits of women in a very unusual way. Backwards on glass. We'll explain. And Tyler Schlichting comes from a very artistic family, but he definitely brings his own perspective to his painting.
Find out what the world is talking about and why. I'm Fareed Zakaria. Join me each week for the new International Affairs series, Foreign Exchange, here on OPB.
Friday night at 8:30 here on OPB.
This is OPB.
Funding for local broadcast of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by viewers like you and by the following. The Collins Foundation. The Collins Foundation is dedicated to improving the quality of life in Oregon.
Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt, a Pacific Northwest law firm with offices in Oregon and Washington. Legal advisors for the future of your business. New Horizons Computer Learning Centers in Oregon and Southwest Washington, providing computer and network training since 1980.
Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, the news of this Wednesday, then the latest on the deadly approach of Hurricane Rita towards the Texas and Louisiana Gulf Coast. A look at what's behind the surge of violence in Iraq, and excerpts from today's Senate hearings on a pre-9/11 intelligence program called Able Danger.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by...
What does the future hold? Will you have the choices to make your world better? To live the life you dream of? At Pacific Life, planning for a better tomorrow is what we're all about. That's why for over 135 years, Pacific Life has offered millions of people a world of financial solutions to help them live well now and plan well for the future. Pacific Life, the power to help you succeed.
Sometimes success needs to be nurtured. Sometimes it wants to be pushed. Sometimes success takes everything we can give and then demands more. And sometimes all it takes is someone who sees what you see. PBIT, we're in the business of financing great ideas so you can take yours all the way to the top.
And by Smith Barney and the Archer Daniels Midland Company.
This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hurricane Rita grew into a monster storm today, taking aim at Texas. Top winds reached 165 miles an hour. That made Rita a Category 5, the most powerful kind of hurricane. The warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico fueled the storm. It spread 300 miles across and had the potential to keep growing. Forecasters said it could make landfall early Saturday along the central Texas coast. In Texas today, mandatory evacuation orders went out for all of Galveston County and low-lying parts of Houston and Corpus Christi. That could mean an exodus of more than 1 million people. As the day went on, thousands of people poured out of Galveston, jamming highways leading north. Others boarded school buses heading inland. Nursing homes also began to move patients out. In Houston, the mayor appealed for the public to help those who can't leave on their own.
There will not be enough government vehicles to go and evacuate everybody in the area, and we need the citizens who are the first line of defense and neighbor caring for neighbor in this community to do your job and to go out and to actively look for those who may need assistance.
State officials in Louisiana urged 20,000 people to leave southwestern parishes, and in New Orleans, engineers worked to fortify levees amid fears the city could flood again. Also today, the Washington Post and the New York Times reported faulty construction of flood barriers caused the disaster after Hurricane Katrina. They said it now appears the storm surge was less than first believed. The death toll from Katrina topped 1,000 today. The new total was 1,036, including nearly 800 people who died in Louisiana. More than 200 others were killed in Mississippi. Cleanup crews in Mississippi cleared a key obstacle today. They blew up a 5-story casino barge. The storm surge from Katrina left the wreck blocking a main highway. Federal officials moved today to get the jump on Hurricane Rita after heavy criticism of the way they handled Katrina. The Federal Emergency Agency, FEMA, positioned hundreds of truckloads of water, food, and medicine at key locations. In Washington, FEMA's acting director, David Paulison, would not make direct comparisons with Katrina, but he did say this.
We are making an extraordinary effort to make sure that we have coordination system in place where we are talking with those people, like I said, almost on an hourly basis, and making sure they have the things to do the job. We are not making any assumptions in this storm. We are asking questions. They're asking questions. That communications plan is so important.
Later, the president issued an emergency declaration for Texas and Louisiana. We'll have more on Hurricane Rita right after this news summary. The U.S. House approved $6 billion in tax breaks today to help the Gulf Coast recover. Charities providing help are also eligible. The package now goes to the Senate. 24 House conservatives called today for putting off the Medicare drug benefit to pay for hurricane recovery. They also want to rescind some of the projects in the new highway bill. In Iraq today, government troops fought with insurgents in an upscale section of Baghdad. U.S. armor and helicopters cordoned off the area during the gun battle. 5 insurgents were killed, along with 2 policemen and an Iraqi soldier. To the south, several hundred Iraqis rallied in Basra against the British Army. We have a report from Lindsay Hilsum of Independent Television News.
Outside the police station in Basra this morning, demonstrators demanding that the police chief resign and the 2 British soldiers be handed back to the local authorities. Iraqi ministers have been sent to Basra from Baghdad to investigate. Local police are reported to have ignored an order from the government to hand the soldiers over to the British. The Iraqi Prime Minister in London was keen to prove that the writ of central government does apply in Basra.
Once I get back, I'll follow up in details the truth of what's happened. It doesn't mean that Basra is beyond the control of the sovereign central government of Iraq.
The Defense Secretary, appearing alongside Mr. Jaffery, played down differences and problems.
We will not cut and run, and we will not leave the job half done. We will stand by Iraq when times are tough, and we will be a committed friend, not a fair weather friend.
British forces occupy the 4 southern provinces of Iraq. Only 2 months ago, the army predicted it would hand over Maysan and Al-Muthana to Iraqi control this year, with Dikhar and Basra to follow next year. That plan now looks rather optimistic. British public opinion may be influenced by the image of troops being attacked in their armoured vehicle, but a rapid departure of British forces would have its own consequences. The British have tolerated the different factions in Basra. They may now move against the gunmen, but in doing that, they risk the kind of confrontations the Americans encounter every day.
We'll have more on the situation in Iraq later in the program. Israeli forces formally abandoned 4 Jewish settlements in the West Bank overnight. The withdrawal finished a process that included a pullout from all of Gaza. The Israelis plan to keep 116 other settlements on the West Bank. Also today, Palestinian President Abbas rejected international appeals to dismantle militant groups. He said, "This is our affair." 4 leading U.S. senators met with President Bush today to discuss his next Supreme Court nominee. They said they floated several names to replace the retiring Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. The president did not discuss his own list, but Democrats and Republicans said they carried warning messages to the White House.
I have raised a certain cautionary signal that I believe the next nomination is going to be a great deal more contentious than the Roberts nomination. And I say that because bubbling just below the surface was a lot of frustration in the hearing which we just concluded.
Again, I urge, as I have several other times, for the president not to send up somebody who is there just as a lightning rod or just as a justice for one segment of society or one segment of the Republican Party. That would be a mistake.
The Senate Judiciary Committee votes tomorrow on the nomination of Judge Roberts to be Chief Justice. Senator Leahy said today he will vote for Roberts. Another committee Democrat, Edward Kennedy, said he will vote against. A federal judge approved settlements for WorldCom investors today worth more than $6 billion. The money will go to some 830,000 individuals and institutions. Citigroup and J.P. Morgan Chase, among others, will pay the bulk of the settlements. Investor lawsuits allege they should have known of the mammoth accounting fraud that destroyed WorldCom in 2002. The price of crude oil rose again today on worries about the new hurricane. Oil futures in New York gained another 60 cents to close at $66.80 a barrel. That news pushed stocks lower on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 103 points to close at 10,378. The Nasdaq fell more than 24 points to close at 2106. Molly Yard died today in Pittsburgh. She was president of the National Organization for Women for 4 years, beginning in 1987. She led the group's fight against Robert Bork's nomination to the U.S. Supreme Court. But in 1991, she suffered a stroke and had to step down. Molly Yard was 93 years old. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the coming of Rita, the violence in Iraq, and a pre-11 intelligence story. We begin our hurricane coverage in the battered city of New Orleans, where the approach of Hurricane Rita has people on edge.
The Army Corps of Engineers continues to work on strengthening the levees that failed after Hurricane Katrina, flooding 80% of the city. Over the past 3 weeks, thousands of tons of fill material have been dumped to seal the huge gaps that developed. They've also driven massive metal barriers across the canal's channel, but the whole system is still fragile.
Well, the system has been weakened from the storm that we just had. And what we wanted to make sure we have is we're able to repair and protect from a tidal flow or tidal influx or heavy rains.
Brigadier General William Grisoli is the deputy commander of the project. He says Hurricane Rita's path will determine whether the levees will hold.
What we're anticipating now, we feel we might have some flooding, and that's why we advised the city and the parishes about the reoccupation. We were concerned about that, so we saw there might be some flooding based on either 3 inches of rain in 6 hours or 6 inches of rain.
Does the possibility exist that 80% of New Orleans that flooded once before will flood again?
There is a possibility depending on the storm and how close it gets to us.
This past weekend, New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin announced a timetable for reopening parts of the city and invited business owners and some residents to come back and start cleaning up. But federal officials questioned the wisdom of that, given the state of the levees and the impending Hurricane Rita, and the invitation was withdrawn.
Can I take your arm?
Yes. Okay. In the French Quarter, authorities were still removing people who had ignored Mayor Nagin's original evacuation order 3 weeks ago.
Just go right in the
car over here. Contradictory messages from local and federal authorities didn't stop Billy Spain from starting to clean up his water-damaged restaurant in the French Quarter. But he's nervous about Hurricane Rita, too.
Very concerned. Very concerned. I'm watching it today, listening to it on the radio, and they tell us we got to go. We're going to have to go. It would be devastating to New Orleans if this happened again. But we'll pick up the pieces just like we did for Katrina, and we'll move on. You know, we have to. This is our home. You know, we love New Orleans. There's no other place I'd like to live but New Orleans.
Spain's restaurant, the Star Steak and Lobster House, employed 35 people. He says he can complete repairs in about a week if he gets help getting the materials to do the job.
We have water. It's not drinkable, but it's good for, you know, cleaning and doing whatever we're doing. You know, there's myself and one other employee here, and that's basically it. And all of our employees are scattered everywhere. So we hope to hear from them. We hope to get them back. We got a little roof damage, flooded in the kitchen, flooded in the dining room. Basically, we have to rip everything out and start all over. Hopefully we can do that. I really hope that, you know, they don't forget about the small business people. It's very important that the small businesses stay here.
Jim Sugarman is the general manager of the House of Blues, a large bar, restaurant, and concert hall just down the street. It employed 350 people before the storm.
We did have some leaks in the ceiling, but really because we didn't take on any flood water, the damage is very, very minor. Some wind damage and just a little bit of water damage.
The building was practically undamaged, its ornate decoration and folk art collection completely intact.
So we've got air conditioning and lights.
But Sugarman says there aren't any customers now, and he doesn't know when they might come back.
Our business is very much dependent on tourism and convention business, and our concert business is 80% local, and the locals aren't coming back anytime soon. So unless there's some sort of huge public relations effort to get business into New Orleans, we're going to struggle.
How crucial is the functioning of the French Quarter to the economy of New Orleans?
Oh, it's critical. I think someone said that it's the engine that runs the economy of the city, and I think that's very true. It's the perfect place for the phoenix to rise from the ashes, so we're lucky that the French Quarter was left intact, and we'll build from here.
Every business person we talked to was confident that New Orleans' vital tourist economy would rebound. They just don't know when.
Jim Sugarman flew to Los Angeles on business today. He said he was confident Rita would miss New Orleans, but Billy Spain is planning to leave if the hurricane comes within 100 miles. Now the Waiting for Rita story as seen from Texas. Gwen Eiffel has that story.
Learning from Katrina, the water is stockpiled, bottled water. The ambulances are on standby and the National Guard is on alert as the hurricane season prepares to land a second punch along the Gulf Coast. This time, officials say they are poised to react. We look at some of those preparations with Major John Jones, Area Commander for the Metropolitan Houston Salvation Army. Dr. John D. Stobo, President of the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston, and Major General Charles Rodriguez, the Adjutant General for the Texas National Guard. Major General Rodriguez, are you prepared for Rita?
We are prepared. Our soldiers and our airmen are on standby, and more of them are coming.
Describe to me what you mean by prepared. How many soldiers, how many airmen, where are they coming from?
The governor has put on notice 5,000 National Guardsmen from Texas, and we are at about the halfway point for readiness. The other half are coming from the soldiers who had previously deployed to Louisiana in support of Operation Katrina.
And what do they do once they get there? Are you using them for the kinds of things that we saw in Louisiana and in Mississippi to keep the peace, or are they standing by waiting to see what their role is?
Well, what's happening right now is we are keeping our forces in assembly areas away from the impact area. We don't want to harm the forces, but they are in locations about 150, 250 miles inland and able to respond first by aviation and then by wheeled vehicles.
Dr. Stobo, tell us a little bit about what kind of evacuation preparations you have made at the hospital in Galveston.
Well, we began this morning about 8 o'clock using both helicopters and ambulances to evacuate patients from the hospital. We had approximately 577 patients in the hospital yesterday. This morning we had a little over 400, roughly 440 patients. Right now we have 70 patients in the hospital. We plan to probably stay at about 70 patients in the hospital, and we'll provide care for those patients with personnel who will stay throughout the storm.
How many of those patients are unable to move on their own? How many of them we saw what happened in the nursing homes in New Orleans, for instance?
Well, as of right now, we don't have any patient in the hospital who's unable to move on their own. The patients who are in the hospital are patients who we feel we can provide health care to in a safe way, or patients who don't have any place to go. But they're not critically ill patients. All the critically ill patients have been moved from the hospital.
Major Jones, you have been involved in the sheltering of evacuees from Louisiana, as well as, I guess, preparing for what may happen if as people are evacuating now in Texas. What kind of strain has that put on you?
Well, it's put a great deal of strain upon us. We are still trying to figure out where Katrina ends and where Rita begins. We were operating 2 shelters ourselves and still have approximately 100 people in those 2 shelters that have not been placed in temporary housing yet. So consequently, we're faced with the responsibility of evacuating some evacuees, as well as our own residential shelters, which we operate on an ongoing basis. And then we've been operating a major distribution center for the Katrina persons, which we now have to shut down as of today, move all of our equipment, and try to salvage what supplies we can to a safe location so that we'll be in good shape and ready to respond immediately as soon as the force of Rita has passed.
When you say you're trying to figure out where Katrina ends and where Rita begins, does it seem like just one continuing rolling disaster to you, or are there different qualities?
Well, no, that's really it. They're stacking on top of each other. It takes a tremendous toll on your personnel, your volunteers who are working hard for one disaster and then trying to recruit them back for a second one, your ongoing staff who are growing weary because you're working 12, 15-hour days, 7 days a week through the whole thing. We're still trying to help Katrina victims for a very long term, which is an unusual part of a hurricane, and then trying to then prepare for another one that comes in while overlapping the service that is still going on for Katrina.
Major General Rodriguez, as you try to decide where to deploy your National Guardsmen, are they coming? Some of them I know in Louisiana, there was some discussion that up to a third of the National Guardsmen were already deployed in Iraq. Some of them came home. Is that also true in Texas?
The state of Texas has about 1/3 of its soldiers and airmen currently deployed or in the pipeline, leaving close to 2/3 or about a little bit more than a half who are available. And many of those are poised and ready in the assembly areas.
Do you work in concert with the local police, with the state police, with other law enforcement, or are you a separate entity as you enter into this kind of disaster assistance?
The National Guard works for the governor, and we get our marching orders from the Division of Emergency Management here in Austin. They get requests from counties, from metropolitan mayors, and when the requirements exceed the capability of local officials, they request to the state, and then the state makes a decision. We often provide that support at the state's bequest.
Dr. Stobo, as you prepare now for the onset of Rita, how, from what you saw, at least it is at a distance in New Orleans, and what you experienced in helping to shelter some of the evacuees from Louisiana, how has that experience affected what you're preparing to do now?
Well, we had talked about evacuating patients from our hospital even before Katrina. It's something quite different from us. This is the first time in 114 years that we have evacuated patients. Usually what we've done is let the patients who are the least ill go home and then take care of the sickest. But what happened in New Orleans quickly solidified our thinking and made it clear that the best plan of action is to evacuate all the patients that we could from the hospital. And so that made a very important turning point in our thinking and our planning.
I skipped over a little bit about what your role is in helping evacuees from Louisiana. Could you describe that for us?
Well, we took care of approximately 500 individuals in our clinics. We actually staffed a clinic in Galveston. We opened up our clinics on campus to the patients. We took care of about 50 patients in our hospital. So we certainly did some, but not as much as many others in the Houston area did.
Major Jones, the acting director of the Federal Emergency Management Administration today listed a long laundry list of things which he is prepared to do, which is creating portable hospitals, beds, water. Do you have stockpiles? Do you have, with all of the effort that's been put forth for Katrina, are there stacks of bottled water? Are there shelters already set up and ready to go?
We do not normally keep stockpiles, but in this case, we have gone out because we've had sufficient advance warning, and even as of today, we were stockpiling food, mainly to help operate our mobile feeding units, which are going to be critical after a hurricane such as this, as they go out into the communities and try to help people with meals, which they can't do because of lack of power or for whatever other reason. So we have been stockpiling food and water and other items that we need for the immediate crisis. And then as soon as the crisis impact is over, we will move into a recovery phase and help people with cash vouchers and other kinds of sustenance to get them through the initial phases of getting their lives back together.
The Red Cross has said that Katrina, in their case, has put some strain on their ability to provide trained help to volunteer in these situations. Are you having that same type of difficulty?
We've been very fortunate in the volunteers we have had come in, and some very qualified volunteers who are very quick learners, because we do have a very good volunteer program which is ongoing, and a number of these people are familiar with our Salvation Army operation. But as the disaster wears on and becomes elongated, then the volunteers seem to fall off. I don't think is as much quality as it has been quantity and longevity of the volunteer force.
Major General Rodriguez, let's talk about evacuation for a moment. We have heard the mayor of Houston, we have heard the governor of Texas, everyone, every local official, and the president of the United States urge people to leave, urge people to evacuate. Does the National Guard play a role, or is it prepared for any kind of resistance to that evacuation order? Are people leaving?
Yes, people are leaving. Just as an example, 2 of our general officers in the National Guard are moving their families tonight as we speak. It's the prudent thing to do, and that means that there'll be less people who may have difficulties and need emergency assistance after the storm.
What happens if people choose not to leave, as happened in some cases in Louisiana?
2 things. One, they either weather it or they suffer the consequences. It all depends on Mother Nature and how severe it hits their area.
And also that same question to you, Dr. Stobo. One of the interesting things we saw that happened after the hurricane hit in Louisiana was the health outcomes that no one had seemed to take as much into account. How are you preparing for the unexpected or the expected health outcomes from a potentially very lethal flood?
Well, we learned a lot from what happened after Katrina, or what was possible to happen, and we have health personnel on site who will actually stay through the hurricane and be prepared to deal with the aftermath and the recovery. We have about 1,000 individuals who we initially thought would have to stay and work with us to provide health care to the patients, but since we've been able to evacuate so many patients, we've been able to decrease that number of employees considerably. But we will have people here to take care of the 70 some odd patients that remain in the hospital, as well as to provide health care to emergency workers and others in Galveston that we need it through our emergency room and our trauma center.
And also, I should point out, Galveston is a little different topographically than New Orleans is, and so you're preparing differently, perhaps?
Well, Galveston will flood with the storm surge and the rain, but it will drain very quickly. and we have sufficient fuel to fuel our emergency generators for a little over 3 days. Certainly the island will drain within that time, and we can decide in that period of time whether we will have to evacuate further or whether we will be able to get additional supplies to continue to provide health care to the remaining patients as well as others who come to the facility.
Gentlemen, thank you all, and our best to you.
Thank you.
With Rita comes memories of the deadliest natural disaster in American history, and Jeffrey Brown has that story.
September 8, 1900, the day a Category 4 storm hit Galveston, then a city of about 38,000 and one of the most prosperous in Texas. After the storm, between 6,000 and 10,000 people were dead, and more than 3/4 of the city completely destroyed. Elizabeth Hayes Turner wrote about it as co-author of Galveston and the 1900 Storm. She's a professor of history at the University of North Texas and joins us from Dallas. Professor Turner, we just saw the citizens of Galveston today have warnings, they have evacuations underway. What was it like for people back then as that storm approached?
It was very different. Isaac Klein was chief of the Weather Bureau at Galveston, and his only contact was by telephone or by telegraph with the U.S. Weather Service in Washington, D.C. And at that time, there was no ship-to-shore communication, so they had to rely on land reports coming from Cuba. The earliest reports came about September 4th, and they weren't very seriously taken from Cubans who gave a devastating report of what was happening on their island. So the U.S. Weather Bureau reported to Klein that we see a tropical storm commencing and it's coming your way, but it wasn't until September 7th that it started to look worrisome. The way warnings were communicated in 1900 was by the Weather Bureau chief putting a flag up on top of the Levy building indicating that a serious storm was about to approach. Isaac Klein claimed in his later reports that he went along the beach and he warned people to leave the island, but he, of course, would have to stay because he was responsible for seeing it through the storm.
So a lot has changed in that way. Give us a picture of Galveston. Give us a picture of Galveston then before the storm, this prosperous town.
It was the entrepot of Texas. It was the main port through which the commerce of Texas came and went. There were beautiful mansions created by wealthy citizens who had made their money out of either cotton exporting or cotton pressing and shipping, of course.
Tell us then what happened with the storm. Give us, if you could, paint a picture of the devastation.
The storms began to surge around noon on Saturday, September 8th. And it was at that point that residents closest to the shore began to panic, not panic exactly, but get out of their homes, move to safer, higher grounds and safer structures. Now, higher ground wasn't very high. It was only 9 feet high at the highest point on the island. But those that did not leave their homes, who felt that their homes were seaworthy enough, sadly, many of those died, because the storm surge was 15 feet and the winds were probably in the neighborhood of 130 miles per hour. And the houses closest to the shore were demolished first by the waves and the wind, and they served as battering rams to the houses behind them, until finally a whole 1,500-acre stretch of land near the coast was absolutely wiped clean of homes, and those structures then ended up in a 30-foot, 3-mile pile of debris down the middle of the island. That pile of debris actually protected parts of the interior of the city, the part where many of the wealthier homes were, and so what emerged out of the storm was then a civic elite who could lead the city into its recovery.
Well, tell us a little bit about that recovery. How quickly could it take place, and what was different about the Galveston that was built?
It did not take place very rapidly. In fact, it was days before there was sufficient communication between the mainland and the island. All of the means of communication were gone. The railroad bridges were washed away. So people had to cross the bay in boats. The rescue efforts began as soon as they heard the news on very early Monday morning. And Houstonians brought in about 100,000 gallons of water first in car trains, as well as supplies, and a volunteer force of about 250 rescuers to come to the island. By September the 13th, it was clear that martial law had to be declared on the island because of looting and because of civilians killing each other over the aspect of looting. So the mayor brought in the Texas militia. Martial law was declared. The militiamen arrived. They set up tents for the homeless along the beach. A couple of days later, September the 17th, Clara Barton arrived with the Red Cross and with 8 members of her team began to set up a distribution and warehouse center in the commercial district. I would like to say that Clara Barton's influence on the recovery was very great. There were several things that she could do for the catastrophe. One, she served as a magnet. People sent money and goods in kind to Clara Barton because they trusted her and they knew her work. The second thing that she did was to elevate middle-class white women on the island to official roles within the emergency civic structure. She demanded that they become co-chairs of all the wards where relief was given out, because she said these women had been doing these relief efforts anyway for years. Why not make it official? So white women were elevated to the role of political entities at that point.
And Professor Turner, just briefly, because we only have a few seconds left here, but I just want to ask you, in the long term, Galveston, I gather, missed out on the oil boom that was taking place and was really never quite the same that it had been before.
Spindletop was a phenomenon in 1901. Galveston was in its recovery stage at that point. And the wharfage on the island is limited, so the oil refining business ended up in Houston. And after 1914, Houston dredged a deepwater port, giving access to seagoing ships, and they bypassed Galveston. So in its recovery, it missed the oil boom.
Okay, Elizabeth Hayes Turner, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, the escalating violence and strife in Iraq. We begin with a report narrated by Spencer Michaels.
The chants and banners in the streets of Basra made it clear: no to occupation and British aggression. This group was protesting Monday's raid by British troops to free 2 undercover British soldiers who'd been arrested and held by Iraqi forces for shooting local police.
We demand that the 2 British terrorists should be handed over to the Iraqi authorities in order to be put on Iraqi trial.
British troops decided to use force to free the 2 soldiers after fearing they'd been transferred into the hands of militants. There are increasing concerns in southern Iraq that members of Shiite militias are also members of the new local police forces. The situation in Basra points to a broader fear that new Iraqi security forces have also been infiltrated by Sunni militants. Iraq's national security advisor told the BBC yesterday, "Our Iraqi security forces in general, I have to admit that they have been penetrated by some of the insurgents." Basra is just one of many Iraqi cities to see a surge of violence in the past week. It began after the U.S. launched an offensive against insurgents in the northern town of Tal Afar. The 10-day operation was led by Iraqi forces, backed by U.S. troops. In Washington yesterday, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld said the insurgents were on the run.
The people of Tal Afar were liberated from the grip of insurgents and foreign extremists who had tried to turn the city into a base of planning, operations, and training. A number of insurgents were caught fleeing the city dressed in women's clothing, hardly a sign of a confident group supported by the citizenry.
But 1 week ago, more than a dozen suicide bombs went off around Baghdad, killing 160 people and wounding more than 500, marking the bloodiest day in the capital since the war began. Al-Qaeda's leader in Iraq, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, claimed responsibility and said it was in response to the Tal Afar offensive. One day later, a suicide car bomber drove himself into a convoy of police vehicles in the Dora district of Baghdad. 21 people died. This weekend, a remote-controlled car bomb tore apart this Shiite market on the eastern outskirts of Baghdad, leaving more than 30 dead and scores more wounded.
I was here when the blast took place. I saw dead and injured people scattered on the ground. I saw a man whose head was blown up and cut into 2 halves.
Americans have also fallen victim to the upsurge in violence. Yesterday in Mosul, 4 members of a diplomatic convoy were killed by a car bomb.
And to 2 former U.S. Middle East intelligence officials. Wayne White covered the region during his 30 years at the State Department until earlier this year. He's now an adjunct scholar at the Middle East Institute. And Roel Gurek was a CIA Middle East officer from 1985 to 94. He's now a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. First, the specific situation in Bosnia between the British and the police in Bosnia. How do you see that situation? What's going on down there?
Well, it's not clear. I mean, it appears the British had some type of operation that these 2 individuals were engaged in some type of either intelligence mission, and it went awry. I mean, we were talking about it earlier that apparently they got caught at checkpoints. They didn't want to stop, and there was gunfire, and they finally ended up being arrested. And obviously, the British didn't want to take the chance that these individuals would be hurt. I think what you're looking at now really is sort of the blowback, I think, in part from the British very light-handed management style down in Basra. It's even lighter than the Americans have had in the north. And you also have competition now amongst these various Shiite militias, them trying to gain a position of power. It's a fairly wide-open town.
Do you agree with that? That is it an isolated thing, just related directly to the situation with the British and the Iraqis in Basra, or is it part of the total insurgent violence situation?
Well, I would agree that it's more generalized, Jim. Throughout the Shia South, which has been more quiet than Sunni Arab areas we've heard much more about, or Baghdad, which is
That's where a lot of the recent violence has been, right in Baghdad.
In the South, there are there's a lot of competition between militias. Much of the police in the South and in various towns is actually loyal to various militias. And I think one aspect of this that's disturbing and confirms this is that the British probably don't fully trust the police because of their connections.
Well, do you agree that the British light touch has come back to hurt them a little bit? Should they have been should they have been tougher against these folks to begin with, or they've been there 2.5 years now?
Exactly. It gets into the issue of militias. The British have been given a sector which is easier to occupy than areas further north, but what we're finding out through this incident is that even Shia very deeply resent occupation and that there are tensions just below the surface even in the south. The whole issue of militias here is critical. Throughout the country, militias have not been taken down as they were supposed to be, in part because security has been inadequate and they've been needed to supplement more regularized security. They've even been used unwisely, I believe, in some of our operations against Sunni Arab strongholds in northwestern Iraq. And when you use Kurdish Peshmerga and Shia militia in those engagements, you're basically fostering even greater tensions along ethno-sectarian lines.
Some people are suggesting that they take these incidents and they add them with other things, and the strife over the Constitution and other things, and they look at the horizon and they see a civil war coming. What do you see when you look at the horizon?
Oh, I mean, I don't think we're at the Civil War point. I don't think we're on the precipice. There are problems. I mean, when you still look at Iraq, what strikes me is actually how limited the revenge killings have been. You're certainly seeing an increase, but when you consider how intermixed the Sunni and Shiite communities are, particularly in the central lands and in Baghdad, and you think about the violence that has been directed towards the Shiites, towards the Kurds, and if you think about how...
You mean in the history of violence?
The history, since the fall of Saddam Hussein, and then also during Saddam's rule, you would have thought, particularly how important the leitmotif of revenge is in Iraqi society, that you would have seen a lot more communal violence, sectarian strife. You haven't actually seen that. The center has more or less held, I think, in all three of the major communities. However, it is certainly true that the constant pounding that you've seen of the Shiite community by the jihadists, the undiminished insurgency, I would disagree with Secretary Rumsfeld. I do not think we have the insurgents on the run, is taking a toll, and something could crack. It's possible, but we're not there yet.
Not there yet. How do you read it?
Pretty much the same. I would like to add that a number of military commanders have said recently something very correct, that the insurgency...
U.S. military commanders?
U.S. military commanders, that the insurgency cannot be taken down militarily. The solution must be political. And on the political front, we're only moving forward in fits and starts, and in some areas not at all. And so that's very, very distressing.
But is the Constitution and the political problems with the Constitution and getting at the vote coming on October 15th, is that also motivating some of this new violence?
Perhaps. I mean, I would dissent a little bit. I think the American military sometimes is giving it an easy way out. I think much of the American military has not wanted to engage in a really classic counterinsurgency campaign. If for no other reason as we don't have enough troops on the ground. I don't think the notion that you're going to get a political solution to the Sunni insurgency, I think, is a bit overstated. I don't think it's possible to have that political solution unless you have an active counterinsurgency campaign where the Americans actually try to occupy the ground and ensure that cities remain clean of insurgents. We haven't seen that, and so far the Pentagon has shown no desire to go in that direction.
I think that one of the main problems is that we do not have enough troops in country. And as we've seen with Katrina, to go back to your lead story, and I hope I'm wrong, but maybe Rita as well, there's a pressure to even pull troops out of Iraq with the constitutional referendum coming up. Remember the last election, we couldn't secure parts of the country, and large areas of the Sunni heartland couldn't even vote. Now they were boycotting many of them, so it didn't matter maybe then. Now they want to vote, many of them. Will they be able to vote? I'm not so sure. I don't know whether we can secure a lot of the country for this upcoming referendum, which will be very important.
But the troop issues aside, just getting the Sunnis and the Shiites to agree that they have to agree eventually if they're going to have a future together in this country, no closer to that?
It's going to be very hard. One of the things that is obvious from the work up to the Constitution is essentially the Shia and the Kurds decided to move on because they just couldn't make their peace over the Constitution draft with the Sunni Arabs. And one thing they have to keep in mind is the Sunni Arab delegates were under pressures that the others weren't. They were under the pressure of being assassinated, you know, if they took back something that was less than something close to their maximalist demands.
What do you see in the immediate future? More of this? There's been a drumbeat. We've reported it here night after night after night, particularly the last couple of weeks. Is there more of this to come between now and on October 15th, and then it'll stop, and then there'll be something else will happen? Or what do you have what's your crystal ball say?
I would say you're going to continue to see a pretty high level of violence. I don't foresee the Shiite community cracking and starting to shoot each other. There's an enormous amount of animosity there, and if that were to happen, then I think
within their community?
within the groups. I mean, the three principal groups here: the followers of the radical cleric Muqtada Sadr of the Mahdi Army, the Supreme Council for the Islamic Revolution, LOC, and the Dawa Party. They all don't really like each other very much, and there are differing reasons for that, some of them quite profound. But I don't see them going into a state of war with each other. If that were to happen, then Iraq I think, is finished. But on I think you're going to continue to see certainly the insurgency continue, and until you see a change of tactics in the way we handle that insurgency, I don't expect this to diminish.
What about you? What do you see in the future?
I would agree. In the immediate future, more violence, particularly in the lead up to the referendum, which will interfere with the vote. And beyond that, as we move on to a new government, we will also see surges of violence as the insurgents try to tear down what's being built up. I would like to make a comment about intra-factional fighting in the Shia South and in the Kurdish North, that even once, if this works and we get some kind of federated system, we could then see a rise in infighting in the various regions. The model for that is the 1996 breakdown, which was total in the Kurdish North, where the Talibani forces, the Popular Union of Kurdistan, and Barzani's Kurdish Democratic Party went at each other. Full bore, calling in Iranian and Iraqi support. This could happen again once the common enemy is removed.
The common enemy, and then they each want to flex their own muscles that they have newly acquired. Is that what you're suggesting? It could happen?
Yes, exactly. Within their own areas, once the national issue is settled one way or another, and that could be failure or success, we could see a rise in infighting within the various regions, even among Sunni Arabs between old Saddamist, former regime elements and religious, militants.
Meanwhile, the insurgency continues to grow in strength?
I don't think it's going to diminish. You're not going to get a political quick fix to this, not amongst the Sunnis. You've got to remember, the political process is primarily there for the Shia community. It keeps the Shia community on course. It keeps the moderate elements in play. I think for the Sunni insurgency, you're going to have a much more aggressive counterinsurgency campaign, and that doesn't seem to be on the horizon because Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld doesn't seem to want it.
Okay. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally tonight, Able Danger and what it knew before 9/11. Kwame Holman reports.
18 months before the September 11th attacks, a since disbanded Pentagon intelligence unit, codenamed Able Danger, identified 60 foreign terrorist suspects inside the United States. On that list were 4 of the subsequent 9/11 hijackers, including Mohammed Atta, the alleged ringleader of the attacks, who flew the first plane into the World Trade Center. However, attempts by Able Danger team members to share their information with the FBI in February of 2000 were blocked by Pentagon lawyers. The story of Able Danger first came to light in a New York Times story last month. But attempts this morning by Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Arlen Specter to find out why the information wasn't shared hit several dead ends. At the start of an investigative hearing, Specter questioned whether the federal Posse Comitatus Act might have come into play.
That is a statute which was enacted shortly after the Civil War, which prevents the United States military from being engaged in law enforcement activities. If the Posse Comitatus Act precluded this information from being turned over by the Department of Defense to the FBI, then that is a matter which may require amendments to the Act.
Specter had hoped to hear today from former Able Danger team members themselves. Army Reserve Colonel Tony Schaefer was a liaison to the Able Danger unit from the Defense Intelligence Agency. J.D. Smith was a civilian analyst on contract. Yesterday, however, the Pentagon notified Schaefer, Smith, and several others that permission to testify was denied.
It looks to me as if it may be obstruction of the committee's activity, something we will have to determine.
But Pennsylvania Congressman Kurt Weldon did testify, a senior Republican on the House Armed Services Committee. It was Weldon who first helped members of Able Danger, Smith included, tell their story to the media.
He was prepared to state, as he told us, that he had an Able Danger chart with Mohammed Atta identified on his office wall at Andrews Air Force Base until DoD Investigative Services removed it. He was prepared to discuss the extensive amount of data collected and analyzed about Al-Qaeda, underscoring the fact that Able Danger was never about one chart or one photograph, but rather was and is about massive data collected and assembled against what Madeleine Albright declared to be in 1999 an international terrorist organization. He too has been silenced.
Speaking on behalf of Colonel Schaefer, Washington lawyer Mark Zaid said there was confusion among some in the Pentagon at the time whether the Army was compiling information about U.S. citizens.
Those within Able Danger were confident they actually weren't compiling information on U.S. persons. They were potentially people connected to U.S. persons. Again, I said they never identified Mohammed Atta in the United States. Apparently the problem that came up was on the chart where his image was, he was listed under Brooklyn, New York, or something to that effect. It had Brooklyn. And those within the Army, either in the legal level or some of the policy levels, were apparently showing apprehension and concern that somehow that was then linking to data compilation of U.S. persons.
And former Army Major Eric Kleinsmith said he later was directed by a Pentagon lawyer to destroy the information, citing Army regulations prohibiting the military from compiling data about U.S. citizens.
Both soft copy and hard copy was deleted or destroyed.
And did part of that involve operations within the United States?
No specific operation in the United States, only a presence that was known, and we were unable to get to the details for specific persons or information in the United States before we were shut down.
William Dugan, Assistant Secretary of Defense, tried to explain the delicate nature of domestic intelligence gathering.
I guess I wish to convey to the committee that U.S. person information is something that we are skittish about in the Defense Department. We follow the rules strictly on it, and we want to do the right thing and follow the Attorney General guidelines.
Mr. Dugan, Mohammed Atta was not a U.S. person, was he?
Based on what I've read in the press since September 11th, 2001, I don't believe he was.
Mr. Dugan, you're the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence Oversight. Can't you give us a more definitive answer to a very direct and fundamental and simple question like, was Mohammed Atta a U.S. person?
No, he was not.
We're dealing with the intelligence gathering data of the Department of Defense and prima facie reasons to believe, and that had that information been shared and the FBI was trying to get it, 9/11 might have been prevented. I hope you'll go back and talk to the Secretary and tell him that the American people are entitled to some answers.
Responding elsewhere in the Capitol this afternoon, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld said the Senate Intelligence Committee has jurisdiction over the Able Danger matter and that he has offered that committee a closed-door briefing.